There is a peculiar emptiness that settles into the chest, a hollowness so complete that even in naming it feels like too much effort. You wake in the morning, and the first thought that crosses your mind is not about what you will do or who you will see, but a quiet recognition that you feel nothing at all. The world continues around you. People move with purpose. Laughter rises from conversations you cannot join. And inside you, there is only a vast, colorless silence. You go through the motions because you must, but each action feels mechanical, distant, as if you are watching yourself from somewhere far away. The things that once moved you, the music that used to flood your heart, the books that opened doors in your mind, the faces of people you thought you loved, all of it has become flat, empty of meaning. And the most frightening part is not the absence itself, but the fact that you cannot remember what it felt like to feel. You reach back into memory, trying to grasp some echo of passion or joy or even pain, and you find only shadows. You wonder if you have become a ghost, a hollow shell pretending to be alive, while something essential has died inside you. And in those moments when you are alone, truly alone without distraction, you confront a terrible question that whispers from the depths of your being. What if this is all there is now? What if you have lost forever the capacity to be moved, to be touched, to feel the raw pulse of existence? You look at others, and they seem to possess something you no longer have, some spark, some aliveness, and you wonder how they do it. How do they laugh so freely? How do they care so deeply? How do they move through life as if it matters? And the weight of this numbness becomes almost unbearable, not because it hurts, but because nothing hurts anymore. Even suffering has left you. You are suspended in a gray twilight where nothing reaches you, where the world cannot touch the place where you actually live, and you begin to believe that you are broken beyond repair. But let me tell you something that Dostoevsky understood with a clarity that few writers have ever achieved. You are not broken. You are not damaged beyond healing. What you are experiencing is not the death of your soul, but something far more complex and profound. You are not numb because something is wrong with you. You are numb because something has shifted at the deepest level of your being, and your psyche, in its ancient wisdom, has withdrawn from the surface of life to protect what is most essential. The Russian writer spent his entire life exploring this territory, this strange country, where feeling disappears and the soul retreats into silence. He knew it personally, intimately, because he had walked through it himself, in the frozen nights of Siberia, in the prison camps where he was sent for his radical ideas. Dostoevsky encountered this emptiness. He watched men who had once been vibrant and alive slowly turn into automatons, their faces becoming masks, their eyes losing their light. He saw how suffering could either wake a person up or put them to sleep forever, and he understood that numbness was not simply the absence of feeling, but a complex psychological defense against truths too heavy to bear. You are not weak for feeling nothing. You are protecting yourself from something you have not yet learned to face. What you call numbness, Dostoevsky would call the sleep of the soul. He wrote about it in nearly every one of his novels. This state where consciousness dims and the heart grows cold. But he never saw it as a permanent condition. He saw it as a threshold, a doorway between one way of being and another. The character of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment moves through the world in exactly this state after committing his terrible act. He feels nothing, not guilt, not fear, not even satisfaction. He is hollow, distant, watching his own life as if it belongs to someone else. But Dostoevsky understood that this numbness was not the end of Raskolnikov's story. It was the beginning of his transformation. The emptiness was not death, but gestation, the soul pulling inward to reorganize itself before it could emerge into new life. In The Brothers Karamazov, Ivan experiences this same deadness after his intellectual rebellion against God and the world. He becomes cold, cynical, unable to feel love or connection. But again, Dostoevsky shows us that this is not a final state. It is a crisis, a necessary breaking apart that precedes integration. What you are experiencing right now is not your ending, it is your transition. You are in the space between who you were and who you are becoming. And in that space, all feeling seems to vanish because the old ways of feeling no longer work and the new ways have not yet emerged. Dostoevsky discovered something that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. There are certain kinds of awareness that strip away the capacity for ordinary feeling. When you begin to see through the illusions that most people live by, when you recognize the constructed nature of meaning and value, when you pierce the veil of social performance and see the raw mechanisms beneath, something inside you changes. You can no longer participate in the same way. The pleasures that others chase seem hollow to you because you have seen that they are just elaborate distractions from deeper truths. The ambitions that drive others feel meaningless because you understand their temporary nature. The relationships that others cling to appear as mere comforts against the void. You have not become cynical in the simple sense. You have become conscious in a way that makes unconscious living impossible. And consciousness, real consciousness, burns away the easy feelings. It strips you down to something more essential, something that cannot be satisfied by the surface of things. This is what Dostoevsky meant when he wrote about the man from the underground, that tortured soul who cannot stop thinking, cannot stop analyzing, cannot stop seeing through everything until he is paralyzed by his own awareness. The underground man feels nothing for the same reason you feel nothing. He has thought too much, seen too clearly, and his capacity for simple enjoyment has been dissolved by the acid of consciousness. But here is what most people miss about Dostoevsky's vision. He did not see this state as the final destination. He saw it as the necessary first stage of a deeper transformation. The numbness you experience has layers, and each layer tells you something different about where you are in your psychological development. The first layer is what Dostoevsky called the exhaustion of false pleasures. You have chased satisfaction in all the ways that society told you to chase it, through achievement, through consumption, through validation from others, through sensory experiences, through accumulation of knowledge or status or power. And at some point, your soul recognized that none of it was touching the real hunger inside you. None of it was reaching the place where you actually live. And so your psyche, in its wisdom, withdrew its investment from these pursuits. It stopped producing the neurochemical rewards that once came from success or pleasure or approval, not because you are depressed in the clinical sense, but because your deeper self is refusing to participate in a game it no longer believes in. The second layer is what he called the burden of seeing. There are people who cannot help but perceive the suffering of existence, the futility woven into human striving, the inevitable decay of all things, the masks people wear, the lies they tell themselves to avoid confronting their own emptiness. Once you have seen these things, once you have really taken them in, ordinary life becomes almost unbearable in its superficiality. You watch people celebrating small victories, and you think, do they not see? You watch them making plans for distant futures, and you think, do they not understand? You are not feeling nothing because something is wrong with you. You are feeling nothing because you are awake in a world of sleepers, and wakefulness is a heavy burden. The third layer is what Dostoevsky understood as the collapse of meaning structures. Every human being builds an internal architecture of meaning, a framework of values and beliefs and narratives that give life coherence and purpose. But sometimes this architecture collapses. Sometimes you look at the foundation and realize it was built on assumptions you no longer accept. Sometimes the whole structure comes crashing down, and you are left standing in the rubble with no map, no compass, no sense of what matters or why anything should matter. This is the crisis that Ivan Karamazov faces in The Brothers Karamazov. He builds a brilliant intellectual case against the existence of a just God, and his argument is so compelling that it destroys his own ability to believe in anything. He becomes paralyzed by his own logic, trapped in a world where nothing has inherent meaning because he has reasoned away every possible source of meaning. But Dostoevsky shows us that this destruction of old meanings is not the tragedy. The tragedy is staying trapped in the rubble, refusing to build again, insisting that because the old structure failed, no structure is possible. The fourth layer, and this is where it gets truly difficult, is what he called the death of the false self. You have spent your entire life becoming someone, constructing a personality, developing an identity, creating a sense of who you are. And then something happens, some crisis or revelation or gradual erosion, and you realize that this self you have built is not real. It is a performance, a mask, a collection of borrowed ideas and learned behaviors and defensive patterns. And when you see this, when you really see it, the false self begins to die. And as it dies, you feel nothing, because the thing that used to feel was itself false. The feelings you once had were the feelings of the constructed self, the persona, the character you were playing. Now that the character is dissolving, there is nothing left to feel with. You are in that terrifying space between selves, where the old you has died, but the new you has not yet been born. Dostoevsky knew this territory intimately because he had lived through it. After his mock execution, after standing before the firing squad, believing he was about to die, after being spared at the last moment and sent to Siberia, something fundamental shifted in him. The man who returned from exile was not the same man who had been sent there. The old Dostoevsky, the young radical, full of idealistic passion, had died in that frozen prison. And for a long time, there was nothing in his place. He wrote later about feeling hollow, about moving through life without truly being alive, about watching himself from a distance, as if his body and mind belonged to someone else. But he did not stay in that numbness forever. Something began to stir in the emptiness, not the return of his old self, but the emergence of something deeper, something more true. The numbness was not the end. It was the dark soil in which his real self could finally take root. This is what he tried to show us again and again in his fiction. Raskolnikov's numbness after the murder gives way to a different kind of consciousness, raw and terrible but finally real. Prince Mishkin in The Idiot moves through the world with a strange absence of normal feeling, but this absence is not emptiness. It is a clearing away of ego and defense that allows him to love more purely than anyone around him. Alyosha in The Brothers. Karamazov experiences periods of doubt and spiritual deadness, but these periods are the crucible in which his faith is transformed from inherited belief into lived truth. You are not losing your capacity to feel. You are losing your capacity to feel in the old way, the automatic way, the conditioned way. And before you can learn to feel in a new way, there must be this pause, this silence, this apparent death. Dostoevsky understood that real transformation is not a smooth evolution. It is a violent breaking apart, followed by a slow and painful reconstruction. The self must be shattered before it can be remade. And during the shattering, during that time, when the pieces are scattered and nothing holds together, you will feel nothing at all. Because feeling requires a coherent self to do the feeling, and yours is currently in fragments. But here is what you must understand, what Dostoevsky spent his life trying to communicate. This is not happening to you by accident. This is not some random malfunction of your brain chemistry or some weakness in your character. This is the psyche's way of forcing growth when you have resisted growth for too long. You cannot evolve into a deeper version of yourself while still clinging to the old version. The old version must die, and its death feels like the death of everything, because from the perspective of the old self, it is everything. The old self is the only self you have ever known. When it starts to dissolve, you panic. You reach for the old feelings, the old meanings, the old ways of being in the world, and you find that they no longer work. Nothing gives you pleasure anymore, because pleasure was always the reward system of the false self, the carrot that kept you performing your role. Nothing makes you feel connected to others anymore, because connection was always based on the masks you both wore, and now you can see through the masks. Nothing feels meaningful anymore, because meaning was always derived from the stories you told yourself. And now you see that the stories were just stories, but there is something that exists beneath the stories, beneath the masks, beneath the constructed self, with its conditioned responses and automatic reactions. There is a deeper self, a truer self, that has been buried under layers of performance and defense and fear. And that deeper self is what is trying to emerge now. It is pushing up through the rubble of your collapsed identity like a seed pushing through soil. But you cannot see it yet because you are still identified with the ruins. You are still trying to be the person you were, still trying to make the old self work, still trying to resurrect the old feelings and meanings and purposes. And this is why you remain numb, because the numbness is your psyche's way of preventing you from going backwards, from rebuilding the same false structure, from returning to sleep. The emptiness you feel is actually a protection. It is your soul refusing to invest energy in anything that is not real, anything that is not true, anything that is not aligned with who you actually are beneath all the layers of construction. Dostoevsky showed us that suffering can wake us up, but he also showed us that awakening itself is a kind of suffering. The man who becomes conscious suffers more than the man who sleeps, because consciousness means bearing the full weight of existence without the comfort of illusions. This is the burden you are carrying now. You have lost the ability to comfort yourself with easy answers and simple pleasures. You have lost the capacity for distraction and denial. You are facing something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding, which is the raw fact of your own being stripped of all the stories and meanings and purposes you used to drape over it. And this raw fact is terrifying because it seems to be nothing at all. Without the stories, without the meanings, what are you? Where is the solid ground on which to stand? Who are you when you are not the role you play, or the achievements you accumulate, or the relationships that define you? This is the question that haunts every character in Dostoevsky's novels, and it is the question haunting you now. But he discovered something extraordinary about this question. When you stop running from it, when you stop trying to fill the emptiness with new distractions and new meanings and new false selves, when you simply sit with the question and let it burn through you, something happens. The emptiness begins to reveal itself as not empty at all. There is a quality of presence, a quality of being that exists prior to all stories and meanings and constructions. It is not exciting. It is not pleasurable in the ordinary sense. It does not give you the highs and lows of dramatic feeling, but it is real in a way that nothing else has ever been real. It is you without the performance, you without the mask, you without the constant effort to be something or someone. And this bare presence, this simple fact of existing, carries within it something that Dostoevsky could only call sacred. Prince Mishkin embodies this quality. He moves through the world without the normal defenses and desires and anxieties that drive other people, and everyone around him is both attracted to and disturbed by this. They sense in him something pure, something essential, something that reminds them of what they have lost in the process of becoming civilized and sophisticated and successful. He feels things, but not in the way they do. His feeling comes from a different source, a deeper place, and it does not depend on external circumstances or the fulfillment of desires. He simply is, fully and completely. And this simple being radiates something that others cannot name, but desperately want. This is where you are being led, though you cannot see it yet, through the death of your false self, through the stripping away of conditioned responses and automatic meanings, through the terrible numbness that seems like an ending. You are being guided towards something more fundamental than anything you have known before. You are being forced to discover who you are when you are no longer trying to be anyone at all. And this discovery cannot happen while you are still invested in the old ways of being. It can only happen in the emptiness, in the silence, in the apparent nothingness that terrifies you now. Dostoevsky would tell you to stop fighting the numbness. Stop trying to resurrect the old feelings and the old meanings. Stop searching for some technique or insight or experience that will make you feel alive again in the way you used to feel alive. That way is dead because it needed to die. What you are mourning is not the loss of your capacity for feeling. What you are mourning is the loss of your illusions, the loss of your comfortable lies, the loss of your ability to distract yourself from the hard truth of existence. And this mourning is necessary and good, even though it feels like death. Let yourself be empty. Let yourself be hollow. Let yourself sit in the silence without trying to fill it or escape it or understand it. This is not resignation or passivity. This is radical acceptance of what is happening at the deepest level of your being. Your soul is reorganizing itself, and it needs this pause, this stillness, this apparent absence of life in order to do its work. You cannot rush it. You cannot force it. You can only be present to it, witnessing it without judgment, allowing it to unfold in its own time and its own way. There will come a moment, though you cannot predict when something shifts, not back to the old way, but forward into something new, a small stirring in the emptiness, like the first movement of spring beneath frozen ground. You will notice that you feel something, but it will not be like the old feelings. It will be quieter, subtler, more steady. Not the high of achievement or the rush of pleasure, but something simpler and more constant, a sense of being present in your own life, a capacity to witness without needing to judge or change or escape, a strange contentment that does not depend on circumstances being good or bad, but simply on the fact that you are here, alive, conscious, experiencing. This is what Dostoevsky pointed toward with characters like Alyosha, who emerges from crisis and doubt, not with the return of his old faith, but with a deeper trust, a lived knowing that cannot be shaken, because it is not based on belief, but on direct experience of something fundamental. You are not returning to who you were. You are becoming who you have always been beneath who you thought you had to be. And this becoming requires the death of everything false, everything conditioned, everything that was never really you. The numbness is the space in which this death occurs. Honor it, trust it, let it do its work. When you finally emerge, if you stay with the process and do not flee back into old patterns, you will carry something that most people never find, a kind of presence, a kind of authenticity, a kind of freedom from the desperate need to feel good or be validated or find external meaning. You will simply be, in the most profound sense of that word. And from this simple being, a different kind of life becomes possible, not a life of chasing highs and avoiding lows, but a life of responding truthfully to what is in front of you, moment by moment, without the filter of a false self trying to manipulate outcomes or protect itself or prove something to the world. This is the gift hidden in your numbness, the treasure buried in your emptiness. But you must go through the emptiness to find it. There is no shortcut. There is no way around. There is only the willingness to stay present to what is happening inside you, no matter how much it frightens you, no matter how much you want to run, no matter how convinced you are that you will never feel anything again. Dostoevsky knew that the greatest courage is not the courage to act, but the courage to be still when everything in you screams to move, to sit with uncertainty when you desperately want answers, to bear the emptiness when you crave fullness, to let go of who you were when you do not yet know who you will become. This is the path of real transformation, and it is walked in silence and darkness before it opens into light. You are on this path now, whether you chose it or not. The numbness is not your enemy. It is your guide, leading you towards something your conscious mind cannot yet comprehend, but your deeper self has been seeking all along. Trust the process, trust the emptiness, Trust that you are not ending, but beginning, not dying, but being born, not losing your humanity, but discovering what it means to be truly human for the first time. If this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in these words, I want you to share in the comments which part spoke most deeply to your experience. Your story matters. Your struggle is not solitary, even though it feels that way. Others are walking this same path, and your willingness to name it helps them feel less alone. Subscribe to continue exploring these depths with me, these territories of the soul that Dostoevsky mapped with such precision and compassion. And if you want to understand more about how consciousness itself can become a burden, watch my next video where we explore Dostoevsky's most disturbing insight about what happens when you cannot stop thinking. Thank you for being here, for having the courage to sit with these difficult truths, for trusting that there is something on the other side of your numbness worth reaching for. You are exactly where you need to be.